They dragged her through the village square at dawn, barefoot, trembling, her golden hair falling in clumps around her ankles as the shears bit closer to her scalp. Her stepfather smiled. The crowd laughed, and a small voice in the back whispered, "That poor girl will never show her face in this town again." But 3 years later, a black carriage rolled down that same cobblestone road, and the woman who stepped out of it wore a crown. Stay with me, because what she did next made grown men kneel in the mud and beg. If you love stories where the cruel get exactly what they deserve, do me a small kindness and subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to me. The morning Tamsin Ouellet lost her hair, the bells of Ashford-on-Wye were ringing for someone else's wedding. She remembered that detail later, years later, when she was wrapped in Belgian lace and sipping wine that cost more than her stepfather's entire estate. She remembered the bells. She remembered the way the cold stones bit into her bare feet. And she remembered her stepfather's voice, soft, almost loving, as he tightened his grip on her wrist. "Hold still, girl. You brought this upon yourself." Hensley Marchmont was not a tall man, but he had a way of making himself enormous. He wore his late wife's wedding ring on his smallest finger, and he had not removed it once in the 11 years since Tamsin's mother had died. Some said he kept it there out of grief. Tamsin knew better. He kept it there to remind her every single day exactly who owned the house she slept in, the bread she ate, and the very name she carried. "Father, please," she had whispered that morning, kneeling on the kitchen flagstones. "I did not steal the brooch. I swear it on my mother's grave, I did not." "Do not," he said quietly, "speak of your mother. Not with that mouth. Not after what you've done. But I didn't." He struck her then. Not hard. Hensley never struck hard. He struck precisely the way a man strikes a horse he intends to keep using. "The brooch was found beneath your pillow, Tamsin, by your own sister. Are you calling Perpetua a liar?" And there it was. The trap sprung as neatly as it had been laid. Perpetua. Sweet, smiling Perpetua, who had stood in the doorway that morning with tears glittering on her lashes, and a sapphire brooch pinched between 2 trembling fingers. "I didn't want to say anything, Papa. I love Tamsin, but I saw her take it." Tamsin had looked into her stepsister's eyes and seen something she had never quite let herself believe until that moment. Hatred. Pure, patient, beautifully cultivated hatred. "You hate me that much?" Tamsin had whispered, and Perpetua had smiled, just a little, just enough. "Oh, sister, I hate you more than that." By noon, half the village had gathered in the square. Hensley had a flair for spectacle. He always had. He stood on the steps of the old market cross, with Tamsin kneeling at his feet, and he addressed the crowd like a preacher addressing the damned. "Good people of Ashford, you all know my stepdaughter. You all knew her sainted mother, God rest her, and you all know what kind of household I have tried, in my grief, to keep." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd. Hensley was beloved in Ashford. He gave generously to the church. He smiled at children. He was, by every visible measure, a good man. "This girl," he said, placing one hand almost tenderly on Tamsin's head, "has stolen from me, not bread, not coin, but a brooch that belonged to her own dead mother, which I had set aside as a wedding gift for my dear Perpetua." The crowd gasped. "Now I am not a cruel man." A voice in the back of the crowd, old Widow Thibodeau, who had known Tamsin's mother, muttered something that sounded very much like, "Aren't you just—" Hensley did not hear her, or chose not to. "I will not send her to the magistrate. I will not see her hanged, but she must be marked. She must be shamed, so that every honest soul in this village knows what she is." He raised the shears. And Tamsin, 17 years old, golden-haired, trembling so hard her teeth chattered, closed her eyes. "Look at me, girl," her stepfather said softly. She did not. "Look at me, Tamsin, or I swear before God I will cut your ear as well." She opened her eyes, and what Hensley Marchmont saw in them, in that moment, made him hesitate just for a heartbeat, just long enough that, years later, he would wonder if he had imagined it. Because Tamsin Ouellet was not crying. She was memorizing his face. The shears bit. Her hair, the hair her mother used to brush every night by the fire, humming old French lullabies, fell in heavy golden ropes onto the cobblestones. The crowd watched in a kind of horrified silence. A child began to cry. Someone, a young man near the front, broad-shouldered, dark-eyed, took a step forward as if to intervene. A hand on his arm stopped him. "Don't, Alastair. He'll only make it worse for her." The young man, Alastair Beauchemin, the blacksmith's apprentice, who had loved Tamsin Ouellet since they were both 9 years old, clenched his jaw so hard his teeth ached, but he did not move. He would regret that for 3 long years. When it was done, Hensley hauled Tamsin to her feet and walked her through every street in Ashford, past the bakery, past the church, past the inn where her mother had once worked as a girl. He walked her slowly. He wanted everyone to see. "Behold," he called out, again and again, "the thief. Behold the shame of the Marchmont house." And Tamsin, barefoot, bleeding from a small cut behind her ear, her scalp pale and obscene in the autumn light, walked beside him with her head held perfectly, impossibly high. She did not weep. She did not beg. She only whispered, so quietly that only Hensley could hear, "One day, stepfather, one day, I will come back, and when I do you will not recognize me, but I will recognize you." He laughed. "Come back as what, girl? A beggar? A whore?" She turned her shorn head, and she smiled at him. A small, strange, almost gentle smile. "No," she said, "as something far worse." That night, she vanished. No one saw her leave. No one saw which road she took, or who, if anyone, was waiting for her at the crossroads beyond the mill. Her bed was untouched. Her few belongings were gone. The only thing she left behind was a single lock of golden hair placed neatly on her stepfather's pillow, and a note written in a hand he did not recognize, too elegant, too steady, to belong to the trembling girl he had shamed that afternoon. "Count the days, Hensley. I am." He burned the note. He told the village she had run off with a tinker confirmation, he said, of her wicked nature. The villagers nodded. Some of them even believed him. But Widow Thibodeau, sweeping her doorstep at dusk, looked down the long road toward the coast, and she smiled to herself. Because earlier that afternoon, just as the sun was setting, an unmarked carriage had passed through Ashford. Black lacquer, silver fittings, drawn by 4 matched greys, and the woman inside it, though Widow Thibodeau had only caught the briefest glimpse, had been wearing a hooded cloak of deep, deep blue. The same blue, the widow thought, as the sapphire in that stolen brooch. Now who, she wondered, settling her broom against the door, would send a carriage like that for a girl like Tamsin Ouellet? 3 years passed. 3 years in which Hensley Marchmont prospered. Perpetua married a wool merchant's son and grew plump and content. The village forgot, as villages do, the small cruelty of an autumn afternoon. And then, on a grey morning in early spring, the bells of Ashford-on-Wye began to ring again. Not for a wedding this time, for a visitor. A carriage was rolling down the high road, black lacquer, silver fittings, drawn by 4 matched greys. Outriders in livery no one recognized. a coat of arms on the door that made the schoolmaster drop his pipe when he saw it. "Dear God," the schoolmaster whispered. That's the crest of—" But before he could finish, the carriage drew to a halt in the village square, at the foot of the very market cross where, 3 years before, a 17-year-old girl had knelt in the dirt. The footman opened the door, and a woman stepped down. She was tall. She was veiled. She wore traveling silks the color of midnight, and gloves of pale gray kid, and on her left hand, catching the weak spring sun, was a ring so heavy and so old that every soul in the square knew, without being told, exactly what it meant. The schoolmaster sank to one knee. So did the baker. So did the priest, fumbling at his collar. And from the back of the gathering crowd, a broad-shouldered man with a blacksmith's hands, Alistair Beauchemin, who had not slept a full night in 3 years, pushed his way forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. The woman raised her veil. A gasp went through the square like a wind through autumn wheat. Her hair had grown back, longer now, darker, almost honey gold, swept up in a coronet of pearls. Her face was thinner, her eyes were colder, but it was her. God in heaven, it was her. Tamsin, Alastair breathed. She did not look at him. She was looking at one man, and one man only, a small, neatly dressed gentleman who had just emerged, blinking, from the apothecary across the square. A man wearing his dead wife's wedding ring on his smallest finger. A man who, upon meeting her gaze, went to the color of old milk. She walked toward him, slowly, across the cobblestones where her hair had fallen, past the spot where she had knelt and bled. The crowd parted for her like water. She stopped, 3 feet from her stepfather, and in a voice clear and quiet enough that every soul in the square could hear, she said, "Hello, Hensley. Do you remember what I told you?" His mouth opened. No sound came out. "I told you," she went on, almost gently, "that I would come back, and that you would not recognize me, but that I would recognize you." She tilted her head, studied him the way a cat studies a bird with a broken wing. "I lied about one thing. You do recognize me, don't you, stepfather?" Hensley Marchmont fell to his knees in the mud. Your Grace," he choked. I didn't know." And the crowd, every villager, every soul who had laughed 3 years ago, gasped a second time. "Your Grace." The Duchess of where? Of what? No one yet knew. No one yet understood how a barefoot, shorn girl had walked out of Ashford-on-Wye and come back, 3 years later, with a ducal crest on her carriage and a ring of state on her hand. But they would learn. Oh, they would learn every last detail. Because Tamsin Ouellet, her Grace, the Duchess had not come home for a visit. She had come home to settle accounts, and she was just getting started. Stay with me, because in the next part, you'll find out exactly who that man in the unmarked carriage was 3 years ago, and why he was waiting for Tamsin at the crossroads beyond the mill. You'll find out what Perpetual really did with that brooch, and you'll find out what Tamsin whispered to her stepfather the moment she helped him to his feet. That made him beg, before sundown, to be hanged instead. Hensley Marchmont knelt in the mud, and for the first time in his life, he could not find his voice. Tamsin let the silence stretch. She had waited 3 years for this silence. She intended to savor every second of it. Around her, the square had gone so still that she could hear the creak of the carriage springs behind her, the distant bleat of a sheep on the common, the quick, frightened breath of her stepfather at her feet. She lowered her gloved hand, slowly, and rested 2 fingers beneath his chin. She lifted his face to hers the way a mother lifts a child's face to scold it. "Stand up, Hensley." He tried. His knees would not obey him. "Stand up," she said again, softer, "or I shall have my men stand you up." And they are not gentle. He stood. He swayed, but he stood. "Good." She smiled at him. The smile did not reach her eyes. "Now, we are going to walk together, you and I, the way we walked 3 years ago. Do you remember the route, stepfather? Past the bakery, past the church, past the inn where my mother once worked as a girl. I should hate to forget a single street. Your Grace, I beg you. Beg me later. Walk first." She took his arm. To anyone watching from a distance, it might have looked tender, a noblewoman escorting a frail older relation. Only the people closest could see how white her gloved knuckles were against the wool of his sleeve, and how his whole body trembled like a man being led to the scaffold. They began to walk. The crowd followed. They could not help themselves. Word had already raced ahead of her down every lane in Ashford, the way fire races through summer grass. Shutters flew open. Doors cracked. Children were lifted onto shoulders so they could see. By the time Tamsin and her stepfather reached the bakery, half the village was trailing behind them in a long, hushed, astonished procession. She stopped at the bakery door. "Here," she said quietly. "Here is where you called me a thief in front of Madame Beauchemin. Do you remember what she gave me that morning, stepfather, before any of this began? A sweet bun, still warm. She slipped it into my apron pocket because she said I looked thin." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "You took it out of my pocket, Hensley, in front of her, and you fed it to the dog." A small choked sound came from somewhere in the crowd. Madame Beauchemin, gray-haired now, one hand pressed hard against her mouth. Tamsin did not turn. She only walked on. Past the church, where she paused just long enough to murmur, "Here is where the priest looked away." Past the inn, where she said nothing at all, only touched the worn doorframe with 2 fingertips and closed her eyes for the space of a breath. Past the well, where she said, "Here's where Perpetua told 3 women I had seduced the curate. I had never spoken to the curate in my life." By the time they reached the market cross, Hensley was weeping, not loudly, just steadily, like a man who has discovered a wound he did not know he was carrying. "Stop," he whispered. "Tamsin, stop. Please, I will give you anything. The house, the lands, every penny I have. Only stop." She turned to face him at the foot of the cross. "Oh, Hensley," she tilted her head. "I already own the house. I bought the mortgage from your bank 7 months ago. The lands as well. The orchard. The mill. Even the pew you sit in on Sundays. I own that too." She paused. "Did you not wonder why your lender stopped answering your letters this spring?" His face went gray. "You did not think I came back empty-handed, did you, stepfather? I came back with deeds. I came back with debts. I came back with every signature you ever scratched on a bad ledger, every favor you ever called in, every quiet little cruelty you ever thought no one was counting." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I have been counting, Hensley, for 3 years. I have been counting everything." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Who?" he croaked. "Who are you? Who did this?" "Who? That," said Tamsin Ouellet, "is the question, is it not?" And it was at that exact moment, with the whole village holding its breath, that a second carriage came rattling down the high road into Ashford. Not black this time. Crimson, with gold trim, drawn by two lathered horses pushed far past the point of kindness. The driver was shouting before he had even reined in. "Your Grace. Your Grace, a rider from the coast. He says it cannot wait. He says..." Tamsin's head turned sharply. For the first time since she had stepped down from her carriage, something flickered across her face that was not cold and was not controlled. Something very close to fear. "From the coast?" she said. "Aye, Your Grace." "From the house. From..." The driver swallowed. "From His Grace, ma'am. He is asking for you. He is asking for you urgent." The crowd, which had been so silent, now murmured all at once, like a single great animal stirring. His Grace. So there was a duke, a living duke, a husband, somewhere, who had sent for her. Tamsin's gloved hand tightened on Hensley's arm so suddenly that he gasped. "How urgent," she said, very quietly. The driver would not meet her eyes. "He says, Your Grace, that you are to come at once. He says there is not much time. He says," the man's voice cracked, "he says to tell you he is sorry. He says to tell you he tried to wait." Something behind Tamsin's eyes went very still. For 3 years, she had built a tower of revenge stone by careful stone, and she had stood at the top of it not 5 minutes ago, finally, looking down at the man who had ruined her. And now, a single sentence from a frightened driver was pulling that tower apart beneath her feet. He tried to wait. She knew what that meant. She had known, in some buried part of her, that she might hear those words one day. She had not let herself believe it would be today. She turned, slowly, back to her stepfather. He was watching her with a dawning, desperate hope of a man who has just felt the noose loosen by a single thread. "Your Grace," he whispered. "Your Grace, if you must go, then go. We can speak of all this another day. A calmer day. I shall be here. I shall be waiting. You shall be waiting," she agreed softly. "Yes, you shall." She let go of his arm. She took one step back. She looked at him as if she were memorizing his face all over again, the way she had memorized it 3 years ago in the dirt at his feet. "Hensley," she said, "I'm going to ride for the coast tonight. I may be gone a day. I may be gone a week. I do not yet know. But I want you to understand something before I go." She drew off one gray kid glove, finger by finger. "Every road out of Ashford is being watched as we speak. Every coach, every cart, every footpath through the woods. If you try to run, I shall know before you have reached the parish boundary. If you try to write to anyone, I shall read the letter before it leaves the village. If you so much as set foot on the doorstep of the house that is no longer yours, my men have orders to bring you to me in irons." She paused. "Do you understand me, stepfather?" He nodded. He could not speak. "Good." She drew the glove back on. "Then we shall finish our walk when I return. Every street, Hensley. We did not get to every street." She turned. She walked back toward her black carriage with a steady, unhurried stride that fooled nobody who was close enough to see her face. Alastair Beauchemin stepped out of the crowd. He did it without thinking. He had been frozen for the better part of an hour, frozen the way he had frozen 3 years ago when she had needed him, and he had not moved, and something in him simply would not freeze a second time. He stepped into her path with his blacksmith's hands open at his sides and his heart in his mouth. "Tamsin," she stopped. For a long moment she only looked at him, at his broad shoulders. At the small white scar above his eyebrow, she did not remember. At the way he was looking at her, exactly the way he used to look at her when they were 9 years old, and he had brought her a frog in a jar and called it a present. "Alastair," she said. Her voice was not cold now. It was not anything she could control. "Wherever you are going," he said, "whoever is dying, let me come with you." She closed her eyes, just for a second. "You do not know what you are asking. I know I am 3 years late in asking it." His jaw worked. "Let me come with you, Tamsin. Please." The crimson carriage creaked. The horses stamped. Somewhere in the crowd a child began to cry, and somewhere else, Perpetua Marchmont, who had only just pushed her way to the front, went the color of cold ash as she finally understood what she was looking at. Tamsin opened her eyes. "Get in the carriage, Alastair," she said quietly. "We ride within the hour, and I warn you now, the man you are about to meet is not the man you think he is, and by the time we reach the coast, he may not be a man at all." She climbed into the black carriage. He followed. The door closed. And as the horses wheeled, and the wheels began to turn, and the village of Ashford-on-Wye stood gaping in the spring sunlight, only Widow Thibodeau, leaning on her broom in her doorway, noticed a small thing that no one else noticed. She noticed that Tamsin Ouellet, the Duchess of Somewhere, had been weeping silently behind her veil since the moment the driver said the word sorry. And the widow, who had seen many things in her long life, lowered her eyes to the cobblestones and whispered a prayer for whoever was dying on the coast tonight. Because she had a terrible feeling that the story of Tamsin Ouellet was only just beginning, and that the worst of it had not yet come. The carriage tore out of Ashford, as if the horses themselves understood what was waiting on the coast. Tamsin did not speak for the first mile. She sat very straight against the velvet, her veil thrown back at last, and she stared at the small square of countryside flashing past the window as if she could push the horses faster by sheer force of will. Alastair sat opposite her. He did not speak either. He had the sense, with a strange, clear instinct of a man who had loved one woman for 20 years, that the wrong word now would shatter her. It was she who broke the silence. "His name is Crosby." Alastair looked up. "My husband. His name is Crosby Wendover. He is the 7th Duke of Marenhall, and he is 63 years old, and he has been dying since the day I met him." Her voice was very even. "Too even. He found me on the road 3 years ago, half a mile past the mill. I had walked all night. My feet were bleeding through my mother's old slippers, and I had stopped because I could not see the road any longer for the rain. His carriage came round the bend, and I did not even step aside. I was too tired. I just stood there and waited for the horses to ride me down." She drew a small breath. He stopped. He got down himself, in the rain, an old man with a cane, and he walked across the mud to where I was standing. He looked at my shorn head, and my bare arms, and my mother's slippers. "And do you know what he said to me, Alastair?" Alastair shook his head. He said, "Who did this to you, child?" And when I told him, he said, "Would you like them to be sorry?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Then come with me, and you shall make them sorry, and I shall help you, because I have a daughter who would have been your age, and she is buried at Marenhall, and I have no one left in the world to spend my money on." She laughed once, very softly, almost without sound. "He married me a month later. Not for love, not for any of the things a man marries a girl for. He married me so that when he died, no cousin of his could undo what we were building. He married me so that the name and the lands and the seat in the Lords would be mine, free and clear, the day they put him in the ground. He gave me 3 years, Alastair. 3 years of tutors and lawyers and dancing masters and 1,000 books and a name that opens any door in this country. He gave me back my life. He gave it to me brand new." Her hand closed slowly into a fist on her lap. "And I have not yet thanked him properly. And he is dying tonight. And I am not there." Alasdair leaned forward. He did not touch her. He knew better than to touch her. "Tamsin," he knew. "Whatever you owe him, he knew. A man does not give a woman 3 years of his life and then keep score." He did not keep score. Her voice broke for the first time. "I did." The carriage jolted hard over a rut. The horses were being pushed past what was kind, past what was even safe, and somewhere on the box the driver was shouting them on. Outside the window, the countryside had begun to roll into low gray hills, and the smell of the sea was already faint and salt in the spring air, though the coast was still half a night away. They changed horses at the village of Cold Harbor just before dusk. Tamsin would not get down. She sat in the carriage with her hands folded, white-knuckled in her lap, and she watched the ostlers work as if she could speed them with her eyes. Alasdair climbed down for both of them. He fetched her bread she did not eat and water she did not drink, and he was just turning back from the inn-yard when a man stepped out of the shadow of the stable and put a hand on his arm. "Friend, a word." Alasdair stopped. The man was small and neat and dressed in plain dark clothes, the kind a clerk might wear, or a priest who did not wish to be recognized as one. He had very pale eyes. "You ride with her Grace of Marenhall." "I do." "Then you should know," the small man said quietly, "that there are 3 riders behind you. They left Ashford an hour after you did. They are not the Duke's men. They are not her men. And one of them is wearing the colors of the House of Wendover, which is to say, the colors of the Duke's nephew, who stands to lose a great many things tonight if his uncle dies with that lady as his heir." The pale eyes did not blink. "Do you understand me, friend?" Alasdair felt the ground shift very slightly under his feet. "Who are you?" "A man who owes her Grace a debt. That is all you need to know. Tell her. Tell her the nephew is moving. Tell her tonight she rides not only against time, but against a knife in the dark. Tell her. Wycliffe sends his regards." The small man stepped back into the shadow. "Ride fast, blacksmith. Ride faster than you have ever ridden in your life." He was gone before Alasdair could draw breath to answer. The carriage tore out of Cold Harbor 10 minutes later, and this time the driver had a loaded pistol on the box beside him, and Alasdair sat with his own hand on the hilt of a knife he had not carried in 5 years. He told her what the small man had said. He watched her face as he told her. She did not flinch. She did not gasp. She listened with the still attention of a woman who had been waiting, somewhere deep in herself, for exactly this news. "Sebastian," she said quietly when he had finished. "His name is Sebastian Wendover. He has been writing to my husband for a year, asking for money. My husband stopped answering him last autumn. I warned Crosby then that the boy would not take it kindly. Crosby laughed and said his nephew was a peacock, not a wolf." Her mouth thinned. He was wrong. What does the nephew want? What he has always wanted. The dukedom. He cannot have it while I live. If he can reach Marenhall before I do, he can be at his uncle's bedside when the end comes. He can have witnesses. He can have a priest. He can have a deathbed paper signed by a hand too weak to know what it is signing. She closed her eyes. He can have everything Crosby spent 3 years protecting me from. Then we ride faster. We are riding as fast as horses can carry us, Alasdair. Then we ride longer. We do not stop. Not at Hereford. Not at the crossroads. We ride straight through. The next change of horses I drive." She opened her eyes, looked at him, You have not driven a coach and four in your life. I have driven everything with hooves in this county since I was 11 years old. Tamsin Ouellet. I will get you to your husband. Something passed across her face then, something she did not have a name for and did not have time to name. She only nodded once, and she turned her face back to the window, and she did not let him see her cry. They did not stop at Hereford. They did not stop at the crossroads. At a wayside inn called the Drowned Hare, deep in the dark, they swapped horses in 11 minutes flat, and Alistair climbed onto the box beside the driver and took the reins in hands that remembered. The way his hands had always remembered every animal that had ever trusted him. The driver did not argue. The driver had seen the look on the Duchess's face when the message about the nephew had passed. The road to the coast was a black ribbon under a clouded moon. Twice they heard hoofbeats behind them, and twice the hoofbeats fell away. Once they passed a fallen tree across half the road, and Alistair did not slow. He took the carriage rounded on two wheels, with the off-side lamp scraping the bark, and Tamsin inside was thrown hard against the door and did not cry out. She was past crying out. She was somewhere else now. She was a girl on a cobblestone square again, with shears at her scalp, learning a lesson she had never quite stopped learning, which was that the world would not save her, and so she would have to become the kind of woman who saved herself. But there was a new lesson tonight. Riding beside her in the dark, holding the reins of 4 mad horses with hands that had wanted to hold her since she was 9 years old. The new lesson was that sometimes, just sometimes, the world sends someone anyway. She did not know yet whether the lesson would be a gift or a wound. She only knew that the smell of the sea was getting stronger, and that somewhere ahead in the dark, on a cliff above the water, an old man who had given her a life was holding on by his fingernails to see her one last time. And somewhere behind her, closing fast through the same dark, 3 riders carried a knife with her name on it. She pressed her gloved hand flat against the carriage window, as if she could push the coast closer through the glass. "Hold on, Crosby," she whispered. "Hold on. I am coming. I am coming as fast as the world will let me." The horses thundered on into the dark. They smelled the sea before they saw it. Salt on the wind, and under the salt, the wet green smell of cliff grass, and under that the faint, unmistakable scent of wood smoke from a great house that had kept its fires burning all night, waiting. Marenhall stood on the headland, like a thing that had grown out of the rock, 40 windows, and every one of them lit. Tamsin saw the lights from 2 miles off, and her breath caught and held in her chest and would not come out again. A last stare brought the horses down the long sea road at a pace that would have killed them in another mile, and as the great iron gates flew open ahead of them, she leaned forward in her seat and pressed both palms flat against the window like a child. The carriage was still moving when she opened the door. "Tamsin, wait, the wheels are still." She jumped. She landed badly on the gravel, went down on one knee, was up again before Alistair could even shout. She ran. She ran across the courtyard in traveling silks and grey kid gloves, with her coronet of pearls coming loose in her hair, and the great oak doors of Marenhall were already open for her, and the steward was already on the steps with his face wet. Your Grace, he is still with us, but the physician says—" "Where?" "The green bedchamber, Your Grace, but—" She was past him. She took the great staircase 3 steps at a time, and her hand on the banister left a small smear where she had cut her palm on the gravel and did not know it yet, up the stairs. Down the long gallery, where the portraits of dead Wendovers watched her run, round the corner. The green door at the end of the corridor, half open, and a low murmur of voices inside, and the smell of the sick room, beeswax, and laudanum, and something older underneath. The smell she had last breathed in a one-room cottage when she was 6 years old, and her mother had not woken up. She stopped in the doorway. The room was full of people. 2 physicians, the chaplain, 3 of the senior household. And by the window, with his back to the bed, his hand resting on the sill in a careful pose of grief that had clearly been rehearsed in a mirror, a tall young man in a riding coat, the color of dried blood. Sebastian Wendover turned around. He smiled. He had a beautiful smile. It was the first thing anyone ever noticed about him, and the last thing anyone ever trusted. "Aunt." His voice was warm. His eyes were not. "Thank God. We had begun to fear you would not come in time." She did not look at him. She looked past him, at the great carved bed, at the small gray shape under the green coverlet, at the hand lying on top of the covers, thin as paper, that had once lifted her down from a carriage in the rain and given her back her name, Crosby. She crossed the room. She did not see Sebastian step back, did not see the chaplain bow, did not see the physician open his mouth to caution her. She knelt at the side of the bed, and she took the paper hand in both of hers, and she lifted it to her cheek. His eyes opened. They were the same eyes. Tired beyond telling, sunk deep into a face that had lost half its weight since she had kissed his forehead at the front door 6 weeks ago. But they were the same eyes. They found her face, and they focused, slowly, the way a man focuses a telescope on something very far away. And then they warmed. "There you are," he whispered. "There is my girl. I am here. I am here, Crosby. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I was not." "Hush." A flicker of the old smile. "Hush, you foolish creature. I told them you would come. Did I not tell them, Hartley?" The steward, by the door, made a small sound that was not quite a word. "You told them, Your Grace," he said. Crosby's eyes moved past her. They found Sebastian by the window, and the warmth in them cooled, just a little, in a way that only Tamsin and the dying man himself would ever know about. "Nephew. Uncle." Sebastian stepped forward. His voice had a small new note in it, a careful note, the note of a man who had been certain of something 5 minutes ago, and was now reading the room again. "I have been keeping watch with you, as you asked. I did not ask you, Sebastian." The room went very still. "You came," Crosby said. His voice was thinner than thread, but every word was a small, clean knife. "You came uninvited. You came with a paper in your coat pocket, did you not? A paper for me to sign." A muscle jumped in Sebastian's jaw. "Uncle, you are tired. You are not. Show my wife the paper, Sebastian. There is no. Show her the paper, or I shall have Hartley take it from your pocket while you stand there, and I shall have him do it in front of the chaplain, and the chaplain will remember which of us asked and which of us refused. Show her the paper." For one long second, Sebastian Wendover did not move. Tamsin watched his face, and she saw the exact instant the calculation tipped, the moment he understood that the old man on the bed had seen him coming from a long way off and had been waiting. The moment he understood that whatever game had been planned, it had already been lost before he set foot in the room. He reached, slowly, into the inside of his coat. He drew out a single folded sheet of paper. He held it out. Tamsin took it. She did not unfold it. She did not need to. She knew what it would say. A codicil. A small, clean codicil naming a nephew as guardian of the estates, in case the new young duchess should prove, in her grief, unfit. A paper signed in a dying hand, witnessed by a frightened chaplain, undone only by a court case, that would take 10 years and break her. She looked up at Sebastian. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. And the strange thing was, she felt no rage. The rage was somewhere else now, somewhere far underneath, ready to be called if she needed it. What she felt, looking at this beautiful smiling man who had ridden through the night to steal her life out from under her, was something colder and stranger and much more useful. She felt nothing at all. Hartley, Your Grace. Mr. Wendover is leaving. See him to the door. He may take his horse. He may not take anything else. If he speaks on his way out, you may instruct the grooms to assist him in being quiet. Yes, Your Grace. Sebastian laughed. It was a small, ugly laugh. You cannot throw me out. I am his blood. You are a man, Tamsin said quietly, who came to a deathbed with a forgery in his pocket. You will leave this house tonight, Sebastian, and you will not come back to it. Not for the funeral. Not for the reading of the will. Not ever. If you attempt to set foot on Marenhall land again, I shall have you taken up for what you tried to do in this room, and I shall have a dozen witnesses to swear to it. Beginning with the chaplain, who I think has just remembered that his bishop is a friend of mine. The chaplain, in the corner, nodded so fast his collar moved. Sebastian looked at her. He looked at her hard, and whatever he saw in her face made a smile finally slip. You little Hartley. 2 footmen had materialized in the doorway. Sebastian Wendover went out between them without finishing his sentence. He did not look back. He did not need to. He knew, the way men like him always know, that he had walked into a room 3 years too late. The door closed behind him. Tamsin turned back to the bed. Her hands were shaking now. She had not let them shake until the door was closed, and now they would not stop. She folded the paper, very small, and she tucked it inside the bodice of her traveling dress, against her skin, where she would keep it for the rest of her life, as a thing to remember. There, Crosby whispered. There. That was well done. You knew. Her voice cracked. You knew he would come. I knew he might. I left instructions. With Hartley, with Wycliffe, with a dozen others you have not met yet. I did not want you to walk into this room alone, child. I have not wanted you to be alone since the night you stood in front of my horses in the rain. She pressed her forehead to his hand. Do not go. Crosby, please. Not yet. Give me an hour. Give me an hour to thank you. Foolish girl. His thin fingers moved, barely, against her hair. You have been thanking me every day for 3 years. Every book you read, every word of French you learned, every time you walked into a drawing room with your chin up, I have watched you become. Do you understand? I have watched a half-drowned girl in the rain become a woman who could empty a sick room with 1 sentence. That is the thank you. That is all of it. She could not answer. Tamsin, listen to me. There is not much time, and I have one more thing to give you. Lean close. She leaned close. He whispered to her. 6 words. Just 6. She would never tell another living soul what they were. Not Alasdair, not Hartley, not the children she would one day have. She would carry those 6 words inside her for the rest of her life, and on the worst nights of it, she would say them aloud to herself in the dark, and they would be enough. His hand grew heavy in hers. She held it for a long time after it had stopped being warm. Outside the green bedchamber, on the long gallery, Alasdair Beauchemin stood with his hat in his hands, and his head bowed, and he waited. He waited because he understood. The girl he had loved since they were 9 years old was inside that room becoming someone he did not yet know. When the door finally opened, and she came out, Her face was very pale, and her eyes were very dry, and she walked past him without seeing him, down the long gallery, down the great stairs, out through the open doors, all the way to the edge of the cliff above the sea. She stood there in the first gray light of dawn, with the wind tearing at her hair, and she did not weep. She had been a girl on a cobblestone square. She had been a bride in a black carriage. She had been a duchess of 3 years. She was something else now. And the something else, standing alone on the cliff above the waking sea, lifted her face into the wind and made a promise in her own voice to no one but the salt and the gulls and the man she had just buried in her heart. She did not yet know that the promise would cost her everything she had left. She only knew that she meant it. The wind off the sea was cold enough to numb her face, and she was grateful for it. It gave her something to feel that was not the inside of her own chest. She did not know how long she stood on the cliff. Long enough for the gray to turn to silver, and the silver to a thin pale gold along the water. Long enough for the gulls to begin their work for the day. Long enough that when she finally heard footsteps in the wet grass behind her, she did not turn around because she already knew whose they were. Alastair stopped a few paces away. He did not speak. He simply took off his coat, the heavy traveling coat he had worn on the box all night, and he laid it around her shoulders without asking. She felt the weight of it settle. She closed her eyes. "He told me once," she said, after a long time, "that the best men in his life had been the men who knew when not to speak. I am sorry, Tamsin." "Do not be sorry. He died exactly as he wanted to, with his nephew thrown out of the room and his wife holding his hand, and the chaplain too frightened to lie for anyone but God." Her voice was hoarse. "He died winning. There are not many men who get to do that." She turned. Finally. Her face was raw with the wind and dry of tears, and Alastair, looking at her, understood that the tears would come later, in private, in some room he would never be allowed into. He understood that this was who she was now. He understood that he could either accept it or go home, and that there was nothing in between. He did not go home. "What do you need?" he said. "A bath, a meal, an hour of sleep, and then a horse. A horse. We ride back to Ashford today, Alastair, before sundown." He stared at her. "Tamsin, your husband has been dead 3 hours. There is a household to settle, a funeral, a will, 100 letters that have to be written before the sun is high. You cannot ride out today. I have a steward who can settle a household. I have a solicitor who can read a will. The letters can wait a week, and the funeral can wait a month. And Crosby himself, if he were standing here, would push me toward the stables with his own hand." She drew the coat tighter. "I made him a promise last night. 6 words. I am not going to break it on the first morning." "What promise?" She looked at him. She almost told him. She came so close that he saw the words move behind her teeth, and then she swallowed them down and shook her head once, and the moment was gone. "Not yet." He nodded. He did not push. He had learned, in one night on the box of a runaway carriage, that there were doors in this woman that would open on her own time, or not at all. They rode out at noon. This time the carriage was not black. It was plain, almost shabby, an old traveling coach with a Wendover crest covered in oiled canvas. Hartley had arranged it without being asked. Tamsin had not even had to explain. The household at Marenhall, in the space of a single morning, had reorganized itself around her, the way a body reorganizes itself around a new heart, and she would not understand for several years quite how much of that her husband had prepared in advance. like a man setting a long table for a guest who had not yet arrived. The ride back to Ashford was nothing like the ride out. The horses were unhurried. The roads were dry. Tamsin slept for the first hour against the corner of the carriage, properly slept, the way she had not slept since the messenger had come, and Alistair sat across from her and watched the small movements of her face and did not let himself imagine anything at all. She woke at the crossroads, beyond the mill. She knew the place before she opened her eyes. There was a particular sound the carriage wheels made on that stretch of road where the stone changed under them, and her body had not forgotten it in 3 years. She sat up. She looked out the window. There was nothing there now. No rain, no exhausted girl in her mother's slippers, no old man with a cane stepping down to ask her name. There was only the road and the wet hedge, and beyond the hedge the first chimneys of Ashford-on-Wye showing pale against the afternoon sky. Alastair, I am here. I am going to do something today that I cannot undo. I want you to know that before we go in. I know you do not know yet. I know enough. She almost smiled at that. It was the smallest smile. Barely a movement of her mouth, but it was the first one of the day, and he felt it the way a man feels the first warm wind of spring. They came into Ashford in the late afternoon, and the village was waiting for them. Word travels fast in places like Ashford, and word of a duke dying on the coast had reached the market cross before the carriage did. The square was full. Not loud, not jostling, just full, in the careful, watchful way of country people who know that something is about to happen and intend to see it with their own eyes. Hensleigh Marchmont was not in the square. Tamsin had known he would not be. She did not even look for him. She climbed down from the carriage in her black traveling silks, and she walked slowly across the cobblestones to where the constable was standing. And she spoke to him for perhaps 2 minutes, in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. The constable went very pale. He nodded. He went away at a half-run. She turned then to the square, to the people of Ashford-on-Wye. She lifted her voice for the first time since she had set foot in the village the day before, and she let it carry. My husband died last night, the 7th Duke of Marenhall. He was a better man than this country deserved, and he loved me, in his way, when no one else in the world would have me. I have come home today to finish what I began yesterday, and then I shall go away from this place, and I do not intend to return. A small wind moved through the square. My stepfather is being arrested as I speak, not by me, by the magistrate of the county, on charges that have nothing to do with what he did to me 3 years ago. They have to do with what he did to the wool merchant Greaves in the winter of last year, and to the widow Penhaligon in the spring, and to the orphan fund of this very parish, in 3 quiet little transfers that I have copies of in my carriage. He will go to trial. He will not be found innocent. I have made certain of that. The only way a woman in this country can make certain of anything, which is to buy every piece of paper that bears his name, and read every one of them twice. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman began to cry. It was not for Hensleigh. My stepsister Perpetua stepped forward. Perpetua did not step forward. Perpetua was already weeping in the second row, clinging to the arm of her wool merchant husband, who looked as if he had aged 10 years since yesterday. You do not have to come closer, Perpetua. You only have to listen. I have not bought your debts. I have not signed papers against you. I am not going to. I want you to live in this village for the rest of your life, knowing that I could have ruined you with a single letter, and chose not to. I want you to look at your children when you have them, and remember that they have a roof because I let them have one. That is the only punishment I want for you. I think it will be enough. Perpetua sank to her knees in the dirt. Tamsin did not look at her again. The orphan fund will be repaid by sundown from my own purse. It will also be doubled in my husband's name, and a trust set up so that no man who calls himself churchwarden in this parish can ever touch it again. The widow Penhaligon will have her cottage back, with the rent forgiven for life. Mr. Greaves will have what he is owed with interest. Madame Beauchemin. In the front of the crowd, the old woman lifted her head. You gave me a sweet bun on the worst morning of my life. I have not forgotten. There is a sum of money in your name at the bank in Cold Harbor. You may collect it at your convenience, or never, as you prefer. It is yours either way. Madame Beauchemin pressed both hands to her mouth and did not speak. That is all I came back to do. Tamsin's voice softened. Just a little. Just at the very end. Be kind to one another, people of Ashford. The world is shorter than you think it is. I learned that last night. She turned. She walked back to the carriage. Alastair was already holding the door. She paused, with one foot on the step. She looked at him, and for the first time since the green bedchamber, she let her face be tired, properly tired, the way a person is only tired in front of someone who has earned the right to see it. Are you coming with me, Alastair Beauchemin? Where? I do not entirely know yet. Marenhall for a season. London for the autumn. After that, I think somewhere quiet for a while. There is a country in the west my husband used to speak of. I should like to see it. She paused. I'm not asking you to be anything in particular. I'm only asking whether you would like to be there too. Alastair Beauchemin, who had stood frozen on a cobblestone square 3 years ago when she had needed him, did not freeze now. I am coming with you, Tamsin. Good, she said quietly. Get in. The carriage door closed. The horses pulled. The wheels turned. And the village of Ashford-on-Wye watched the plain traveling coach roll away down the high road in the long gold light of the late afternoon, until it was no more than a dark dot against the hedges, and then nothing at all. Widow Thibodeau, leaning on her broom in her doorway, lowered her eyes to her own threshold, and smiled, very softly, to herself. Go on, child, she whispered. Go and live the rest of it. Inside the carriage, Tamsin rested her head against the window. The countryside flowed past. The shadows were long, and the air was sweet, and somewhere ahead of her, beyond the next hill, was a life she had not yet learned how to live, and a man across from her she had not yet learned how to love, and a promise of 6 small words she had not yet learned how to keep. She closed her eyes. She was 20 years old. She was just beginning. The first summer at Marenhall was the quietest summer of her life. She had expected noise. She had expected lawyers in dark coats, and distant cousins arriving uninvited, and letters from London asking impertinent questions in beautiful handwriting. All of that came, of course, but it came against a background of such enormous quiet that she heard, for the first time in years, the small sounds of her own days. The crunch of gravel under her shoes in the morning, the clink of a teacup against a saucer at 4, the slow turning of pages in the library at night, when she sat in Crosby's old chair, with Crosby's old reading lamp lit, working through the ledgers and the correspondence and the long, careful instructions he had left behind for her in a sealed box on his desk. He had thought of everything. Of course he had. There were letters to be opened on her first day alone, and her first month, and the morning of her 21st birthday. There were notes to the solicitor explaining which cousin to humor and which to ignore. There was a small folded paper tucked inside a book about wildflowers that said only, in his thin, precise hand, Eat something, child. I know you are not eating. She wept over that one. She did not weep over most of them, but she wept over that one, sitting on the floor of the library at 2 in the morning, with a wildflower book open across her knees. Alasdair did not push. He had a room in the east wing, and a place at her table, and a position on the estate that the steward had invented in one afternoon, and that no one questioned because no one dared. He rode out with her in the mornings. He read with her in the evenings. He learned, slowly, with the patience of a man who had waited 20 years already, what it was to live in the same house as a woman who was not yet sure whether she was a widow or a wife or simply a person. He did not ask her to choose. He did not even look like a man who was waiting for her to choose. That, more than anything, was what made her begin, very slowly, to choose him. It happened in October. A cold, bright afternoon. She had been walking the cliff path alone, the way she did most afternoons, and she had come back through the kitchen garden and found him kneeling in the dirt, fixing the hinge on the gate that had been broken since August. His sleeves were rolled. There was a smudge of rust on his jaw. He looked up at her and smiled a small, ordinary smile of a man caught doing useful work, and something inside her, some last small held breath she had been holding since the green bedchamber, finally, quietly, let go. She did not say anything. She only knelt down next to him in the dirt and held the gate steady while he tightened the screw. When the hinge was fixed, he sat back on his heels and he looked at her and he said, "Tamsin." And she said, "I know." That was the whole of it. There was no proposal. There was no scene. They were married in the chapel at Marenhall 6 weeks later, with Hartley as witness, and the chaplain reading from the same book he had read from at her first wedding. And she wore a dress, the color of dawn, rather than the color of morning, because Crosby himself, in one of his letters from the sealed box, had instructed her to, "Do not wear black for me twice, child. Once was enough. Wear something the color of a morning I would have liked to see." She wore pale gold. She thought he would have approved. Hensley Marchmont was hanged in the spring. Not for what he had done to her. She had meant what she said in the square. The charges were the wool merchant and the widow and the orphan fund and the long, careful papers she had bought up over 3 years and turned over to the magistrate without ever once putting her own name to them. He went to the scaffold protesting his innocence in a voice that no one believed. The crowd that watched him hang was smaller than the crowd that had watched him shear her hair. She did not attend. She was at Marenhall, in the kitchen garden, planting bulbs with Alasdair. And when the messenger came up the drive with the news, she only nodded once and went on planting. "Are you sorry?" Alasdair asked her that night. No, she thought about it. "But I am not glad either. I thought I would be glad. I have been carrying that gladness for 3 years like a stone in my pocket. And today, the stone was gone, and there was nothing there at all, just my pocket. That is the better way to carry it, Tamsin." "Yes," she said. I think it is." Perpetua lived to be old. She lived in the same village, in the same small house, with the same wool merchant husband who never quite looked at her the same way after that afternoon in the square. She had 3 children. She named the eldest girl Tamsin, and never explained why, and never wrote to her stepsister to tell her. And Tamsin only learned of it 12 years later by accident, from a letter from Widow Thibodeau, who was by then very old indeed, and writing her last letters with a shaking hand. Tamsin read the letter twice. She folded it. She put it in the same small box where she kept Crosby's wildflower note and the codicil Sebastian had brought to the deathbed, and the single lock of golden hair she had cut from her own head the morning after her first wedding, 3 years before any of this began, and kept ever since, for reasons she had never been able to name. She did not write back to Perpetua. But the next spring, without any letter being sent, a quiet sum of money appeared in a trust for a child called Tamsin Greaves in Ashford-on-Wye, to be paid out on the girl's 18th birthday, with no name attached. Sebastian Wendover she heard of twice more in her life. Once in Paris, where he was said to have lost a great deal of money at cards. Once in Lisbon, where he was said to have married a wealthy widow and then to have left her. After Lisbon, she did not hear of him again, and she did not look. Some doors, she had learned, are best left to swing shut on their own. She had 2 children, a boy first, then a girl. The boy she named Crosby, after the man who had given her back her life. The girl she named Marguerite, after her own mother, whose name she had not spoken aloud in the years between the cobblestone square and the green bedchamber, and which now, finally, she could say without her voice breaking. She lived a long life, longer than most women of her station. She watched her children grow, and she watched Alistair's hair turn gray at the temples and then white at the ears, and she watched the sea outside her window in every weather there is. And on the worst nights of her long life, the nights when grief came back uninvited the way grief always does, she would sit up in the dark and whisper to herself the 6 words Crosby had given her, and they were always, always enough. She never told anyone what they were. Not Alastair, not her children, not the grandchildren who came after. The 6 words went into the ground with her, on a grey morning in the parish church at Marenhall, beside the husband who had found her in the rain, and the husband who had fixed her garden gate, both of them buried within 20 feet of each other under the same patch of English sky. That is the end of the story of Tamsin Ouellet, or almost the end, because the story does not really belong to her. It belongs to every girl who has ever knelt in a square while someone she trusted held a pair of shears above her head. It belongs to every person who has ever made a promise in the dark to come back as something the world would not recognize. It belongs to anyone who has ever stood barefoot at a crossroads in the rain and waited for a carriage that they were not certain would ever come, and discovered, much later, that the carriage had been on its way to find them the whole time. So, let me ask you something before I go. Who was your Crosby? Who was the one person in the worst hour of your life who stopped their carriage in the rain and asked you your name? Have you thanked them? Have you told them? Because if they are still in the world tonight, there is still time, and if they are not, then you carry their 6 words for them, the way Tamsin carried hers, and you let those words be enough on the nights when nothing else is. If this story moved you, even a little, do me one small kindness. Subscribe to this channel. Not for me. For the next girl who finds it at 2 in the morning when she needs to hear that the carriage is coming. Because the carriage is always coming. She only has to keep walking until it gets there.